And aloha.
Aloha.
I want to welcome everybody tonight. Thank you so much for joining us. For those of us that took the time to join tonight's discussion, I want to welcome everyone to now our fourth series in the virtual town hall talk story sessions that we started a few weeks ago. And tonight's discussion is something that is very important to me and I hold dear in my heart as a union member of the Airline Pilots Association and a proud union member. And so tonight discussion is going to be about unions and about labor in Hawaii and why they are so important to Hawaii and so important to our economic prosperity. We got a great bunch of panelists tonight that have taken the time to join this discussion, and I really, really appreciate each and every one of them. They are some of Hawaii's labor leaders at some of our largest unions and public sector unions and private unions across Hawaii. And so I'd like to give each of them a chance to briefly introduce themselves. And so we'll start at the top with Nate Kinney. Aloha, Nate.
Hi, aloha. Nathaniel Kinney with the Hawaii Construction Alliance. The Hawaii Construction Alliance is composed of the Hawaii Regional Council of Carpenters, the Laborers Local 368, Operating Engineers Local 3, Cement Finishers and Plasters Local 630, and the Bricklayers Local 1. So these are all the 5 unions that are have a direct contractual relationship with general contractors. That's us.
Fantastic. Stacy, welcome.
Aloha. My name is Stacy Moniz. I'm with Hawaii Government Employees Association. We're the largest public sector union, and I think the largest union by membership in the state. We have over 40,000 members and associate members representing employees that work for the state and the various counties across the island chain.
Mahalo, thank you for joining us. And Jason Bradshaw.
Hi, yes, Jason Bradshaw, Government Affairs Legislative Representative for the ILW Local 142. And I think we're going to get into the panel, talk about it then. Thank you, Senator.
Okay, thank you. And Randy Swindell.
Yeah, Randy Swindell. I'm the port representative for the Masters Mates and Pilots Union in Honolulu. Also the president of the Hawaii Ports Maritime Council. Been going to sea for 47 years. So I think I know a little bit about the topic here that's up for discussion.
Great. Thank you so much, Randy, for joining us. And finally, representing the Hawaii State Teachers Association, Mitzie Higa.
Hi, so I'm Mitzie Higa. I work for Hawaii State Teachers Association, kind of self-explanatory teachers, but it includes counselors, registrars, 13,500 to 13,700 members, depending on the year. And I advocate for them.
Great. Thank you so much for joining us, Mitzie. So before we jump right into our panel discussion, and we have a bunch of great topics to talk about tonight, I want to set the tone, do a little bit of education and a little bit of history on unions, not just here in Hawaii, but nationally and unions here in our country. So I'm going to stop my video right now and I'm going to share a couple slides, and this will take a few minutes, but I hope you enjoy it. So here's a great quote from one of our country's great leaders, President Franklin D. Roosevelt. And he said, "Those who have long enjoyed such privileges as we enjoy forget in time that men have died to win them." And this picture here really captures the essence of what President Roosevelt was saying when he spoke those words. This is a picture from August 1st, 1938, something I know Jason will probably be very familiar with. This was the Hilo massacre down at the Hilo, what was the Hilo port, the Hilo harbor in 1938, when unionized members and members that were working on the docks, experienced violence at the hands of the local police because they were protesting their rights and wage rights and work laws and different types of things that were not being afforded to them. And so this photo here is known as the Hilo Massacre in 1938, and it's one of the historical things that is really important for unions in Hawaii. So what is a union? A union, for those of us that are not sure of what a union is, there's a lot of misconceptions out there, but a union is basically a labor or a trade organization. And it's an organization of workers who are dedicated to protecting the members' interests and improving different things within their work environment, like wages, hours, and working conditions, to name a few. Unions work like a democracy. Unions hold elections and they elect officers who represent them and make decisions on their behalf and negotiate with the employer that allows those workers to have more power on the job. Unions negotiate with their employer. They sit down, they talk about what the employer's needs are, they talk about what the workers' needs are, and once they can come to an agreement on what that looks like for a certain period of time, they sign a collective bargaining agreement, and that is a binding agreement that the company and the employer and the employee adhere to while that employer and the employee is executing that contract. Union members, they pay monthly dues. Some of them can either be fixed costs, $50 a month, or some of them can be a percentage of a member's income. As I said at the opening, I'm a union member, a 10-year union member of the Airline Pilots Association, and my union dues to ALPA is roughly about just under 2% of my monthly income. That's what goes to pay my union dues. Now, why are unions important? Well, unions advocate for higher wages. They advocate for better benefits, a safer workplace, a voice on the job, and a higher quality of life. And I truly, truly believe that unions work to make America strong. Unions built the middle class after World War II and really make America strong. And it is something that I truly believe can help restore the middle class in this country and that we should support. This is a picture of the HMS hosts workers at the Honolulu airport. They're members of Unite Local 5. And if you go to the airport and you buy a coffee at Starbucks or a burger at Burger King or any of one of the vendors there, these often are the employees that you'll interact with, and they're represented by Unite Local 5. Now, a brief history on unions nationally. The first trade union was established in 1794 in this country. Unions and the origins of labor unions trace its dates back to the Industrial Revolution in Europe. But here in our country, it started and were first established in 1794. The Federation of Organized Trades and Labor Unions was formed in 1881 with the largest union and probably the most famous union of the American Federation of Labor, which was founded in 1886. Now, there are several key pieces of action of Congress and legislation that was passed. One of them was in 1913 when Congress created the Department of Labor. In 1935, Congress passed the National Labor Relations Act, which regulated private sector unions. In 1938, Congress passed the Fair Labor Standards Act. These are critical pieces of legislation that have helped unions. And after World War II, because unions made up a big part of the American manufacturing machine that helped build and supply all of the equipment that our soldiers needed during World War II, whether it was vehicles, ships, tanks, bullets, uniforms, you name it. A lot of unions helped contribute to that. And so as a result, union membership and the percentage of workers belonging to a union peaked at 35% across our country, with the highest union members being in 1979 at 29 million. Well, today, in 2019, 2020, unions nationally represent about 14.6 million workers, and that is down from 17.7 million workers in 1983. The picture to the right is a famous picture from Memphis, Tennessee, when municipal sanitation workers were on strike, and they held up these signs, "I am a man." And at one of the rallies, Martin Luther King came to speak in Memphis, and the next day he was assassinated. And he had been there to speak to sanitation workers that were on strike. Now, here in Hawaii, we have a bunch of different unions. We have some private unions, some public unions, like Nathaniel talked about, the private union that he represents, and the unions that make up the Hawaii Construction Alliance. We also have some federal unions. These are just an examples of some unions that are represented here in Hawaii. We have the carpenters, like Nathaniel talked about, Unite Local 5. That was a photo I had. If you go to many of the hotels in downtown in Waikiki, many of the people that work there are represented by Unite Local 5. You have the IBW, the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers. You have SHOPO, that represents our police officers across the state, our firefighters. HGA, like Stacy talked about, the largest public sector union in Hawaii with over 40,000 members. You have the University of Hawaii Professional Assembly. Most of the professors at the University of Hawaii and the community colleges are all represented by UHPA. You have AFSCME, which is one of the largest unions in all of America. We have the Hawaii State Teachers Association, the UPW. Many of our county workers are members of the UPW. There's UPW members up at Hilo Hospital. And then finally, representing LW, the International Longshore and Warehouse Union, LW Local 142, represents different unions and different members throughout the state. Jason will talk about that a little bit. Everything from employees at the Fairmont Orchid here on the island of Hawaii, all the way down to the docks of Honolulu and our longshore and our different unions that help offload our cargo and our ships. The topics we're going to discuss tonight that I think are relevant to our conversation is the Jones Act, and we're going to talk about that. Project labor agreements, what are those and why should we have them? Right to work laws. Many states and several states in this country are starting to pass right to work laws. Is that good for a union? Is that bad for a union? Why are states passing those things? And maybe what can the federal government do? What are Davis-Bacon? What's Davis-Bacon wages? What are community workforce agreements? And finally, I'm sure Stacy can touch on the Janus versus AFSCME Supreme Court decision from last year and how that can potentially affect our public unions such as the HGA and the University of Hawaii Professional Assembly, amongst others. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen here and I'm going to come back on. And with that being said, we have a good 40 minutes for a very robust discussion. And so I'm going to hand it over to Randy Swindell. And we are going to talk about something that is talked about often in Hawaii, and that is the Jones Act. And so, Randy, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Kai. Thank you for the opportunity to speak on it, on the Jones Act. And what I think people should remember is that the Jones Act is a comprehensive legislation. It was enacted in 1920. And previous to the Jones Act, there's been a lot of laws, cabotage laws, laws that govern cargo between U.S. ports. So the Jones Act wasn't the first law of this nature, but what it did was compiled a bunch of other laws together, and that's what we're dealing with now. So since the beginning of the Republic, we've had these kind of laws on the books. And worldwide, there's 91 other countries that have similar laws that we have that reserve cargo between the ports of their country. So what the Jones Act does is it reserves cargo that is shipped between U.S. ports or U.S. built, U.S. owned, and U.S. crewed ships. And for example, what that means is that if a ship loads a cargo in LA, a Jones Act ship loads a cargo in LA, they can bring it here to Hawaii. A foreign flag ship can't do that. What the Jones Act doesn't do is it doesn't restrict foreign flag ships from coming here and dropping off cargo. What the foreign ships are restricted from doing is picking up cargo here and taking it to LA. They cannot do that. And an example of what happened to a company that violated the Jones Act in 2011 was a Fury Operating LLC. And what they decided to do without a waiver, waivers can be given by the president, but there was no waiver. They chartered a foreign flag ship to bring a jackup rig, the Spartan 151, from the Gulf of Mexico to Alaska. And that resulted in a $15 million fine that was eventually settled for $10 million. And so that's why it's important for companies not to violate the Jones Act. That was a historic fine in Jones Act history. Why the Jones Act is necessary is that it provides a ready manpower pool of mariners in case of emergency, in case the military needs to crew up a bunch of ships in a reserve fleet. There's people to call on. It also keeps an active, viable shipbuilding base in our country, preserving valuable shipbuilding skills. If we get into a big war with someone, we don't want to start off from stop. We want to have something that's already going that we can ramp up. Another thing that it does, and this is for us, it ensures a secure, dedicated, and unimpeded supply chain from the mainland to us. Another point is it provides, like you were saying before, good paying middle-class jobs. And these, since we're American citizens, we pay state, local, and federal taxes. If the Jones Act were to go away and you have foreign people doing this, they do not pay into the system. That money just goes away. Another thing that it does is provides access to ships and crews for military sea lift in support of our troops. And then, from the past, my two favorite lessons from the past are Teddy Roosevelt's Rough Riders in the Spanish-American War, 1898. And everybody knows the story of the Rough Riders and San Juan Hill and all that kind of stuff. But what they don't know is because it wasn't enough sea lift, he had to leave 1/3 of his force behind in Tampa and all of the horses. And these guys, when they got to Cuba, were not trained to fight on foot. It could have been a disaster, but luckily for us, it wasn't. During World War I, 200 ships were sunk in a 2-week period. And because war was going on, you also brought up the, war production, iron and all that was in short supply. So they came up with a plan to build wooden, they appropriated $300 million to build wooden ships with steamship plants. It was a terrible idea, but you can still see the results of that in Charles County in Maryland. It's called the Ghost Fleet of Malo Bay. So those are a couple of reasons, and there's been more of why you need to have these shipbuilding skills. You need to have people working continuously so that if you need them, you can ramp it up. That's why we have the Merchant Marine Act. That's what's also called the Jones Act.
Well, thank you, Randy.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah.
What were you going to say?
And then we can contrast that post Jones Act, due to the shipyard manufacturing base that was in place during World War II, we ramped up production They were making a ship in 3 days. That was faster than the Germans could sink them. So that's why for the national defense, we need the Jones Act. Now, to this day, the men and women of the U.S. Merchant Marine continue to serve the interests of our country, supplying the troops in all the far-flung places where they are around the world. And we're also fulfilling our domestic shipping requirements during the COVID-19 crisis. So for us, our motto is we deliver, and that's what we do. And the bottom line for Hawaii is the Hawaii citizens can count on us. We know that you depend on us to keep the goods coming in. Our quality of life depends on it. And also remember that we are your friends and neighbors, and in some cases, your relatives. We won't let you down.
Well
So
said.
that's in a nutshell. If you have any questions, I'm happy. Yeah.
I
Happy to
couldn't
answer.
agree with you more, Randy. You know, I'm a staunch supporter of the Jones Act. I support American jobs, and you know, the Jones Act supports 13,000 jobs for Hawaii's families. It provides $787 million in annual workforce income and over $3.3 billion in economic impact to our local economy. I try to think of it like this because the Jones Act and how our maritime fleet operates is very similar to our airline fleet. You can jump on, just like a ship can come from somewhere in Asia and come directly to Honolulu, correct? They can do that right now.
Right.
Just like you can jump on an airplane in Asia and fly straight to Los Angeles. No difference. But you don't get on that same airline and fly from Los Angeles to Las Vegas. We don't allow foreign air carriers to fly our domestic flying routes. Just like we don't allow foreign flagged vessels to operate our US domestic shipping routes. Why? A couple of reasons why. If you started allowing foreign air carriers to fly US domestic routes across the United States, one, I would be out of a job. And thousands of pilots and flight attendants would be out of a job, and we wouldn't have the US airline fleet. Why? Because we cannot compete with nationalized airlines. We cannot compete with foreign countries that subsidize their airlines and pay their workers way lower wages than we pay here in America. The other reason is national defense. Just like we wouldn't want foreign flagged air carriers flying all over the United States, our US domestic routes, we don't want foreign ships or maritime vessels in our intercoastal waterways and going up the Mississippi River. We wouldn't want that either. And so that's why I think the Jones Act is vital to Hawaii. It's vital to our country. It's vital to our national defense. Doing anything to repeal or exempt the Jones Act will kill American jobs. And that is not something I can support. And so, you know, I'm a staunch supporter of the Jones Act, and I thank Randy for doing that. There's a lot of misconceptions out there, and there's passionate arguments on the other side as well. But at the end of the day, I really believe the Jones Act is vital to Hawaii, and it is one of the reasons why that the Jones Act has been around for over 100 years. Just like the airlines have the military craft flights in a time of war, we have the ability for the Jones Act to provide the United States military not just ships that are available, but also the shipbuilding capacity at our America's shipyards to build those ships. I hope that kind of breaks it down and makes sense. All right, thank you, Randy. We're gonna jump over to Nathaniel Kinney at the Hawaii Construction Alliance because we want to talk about project labor agreements. We want to talk about Davis-Bacon wages and community workforce agreements, and have Nathaniel give us a perspective from the private unions, many of them that do many major construction projects here in Hawaii, an opportunity to talk about that.
Yes, thank you, Senator. I appreciate the time. So, you know, when you talk about a project labor agreement or a community workforce agreement, they're the exact same thing. And what project labor agreements do and what community workforce agreements do is they make sure that the local jobs go to local people. And that's extremely important anytime, but especially in times like, and these agreements came about during the Great Depression. So what you had was a national crisis, 30% unemployment, workers ricocheting or moving from Dust Bowl in the middle of the country to California in search of work. And so what you'd have is you'd have a situation where, there's a kind of like the area standard wages, like let's say, they're paying guys $10 an hour to dig ditches. You get a whole bunch of refugees that are moving out of a bad situation into California looking for work. And they're like, you know what? I need work. I'll work for $5. And then the next wave of guys would come in and be like, we'll work for $4. And so what you would see is workers consistently undercutting themselves just because they're desperate. And so what FDR and what came out of the Great Depression was this idea and this concept of a project labor agreement, where what we're going to do is the Hoover Dam, for example, is we're going to build this massive construction project like the Hoover Dam, except we're going to stabilize wages, and we're going to make sure that no matter who you are, whether first we want to make sure that local workers go out first, but let's say all the local workers are working and then guys come in from out of state. Okay, well, you wait in line, and then when it's time for you to go out to your job, you can go out to your job and you get paid the same wage as the guy standing next to you. And so what project labor agreements do, at least for the construction industry, is they stabilize wages and they make sure that workers are sent out to jobs in the order that they come in. The first person that comes in to sign the list is the first person that goes out. Now, the law, the underpinning of project labor agreements and community workforce agreements come from, it's called the Construction Industry Proviso inside of the National Labor Relations Act. So it's when they crafted the National Labor Relations Act, they basically guaranteed construction industry because the jobs are intermittent. It's a little bit different. It's not like a shipping job. It's not like a government job. Construction is when we're building it, you're working, and when we're not building it, you're sitting on the bench. And so they realized that when they created the National Labor Relations Act, and they kind of exempted a small piece of the National Labor Relations Act for construction projects, large, massive projects. The rail project is covered by a project labor agreement. So these are things that came about during the Depression, but probably now more than ever apply to the situation that we're in, COVID, and even before COVID. So what a lot of people don't realize, and why project labor agreements and community workforce agreements are especially important for federal projects, is you don't need to have a license. You don't need to have even a GE tax license in order to do a construction job in Honolulu if you're working on a military base. So basically, a military contract, millions of dollars, tens of millions of dollars. We desperately rely on this flow of income from the federal government to build barracks, what have you, for the military. What could literally happen right now is a contractor from the mainland or outside even from the mainland, from an international company, could get a military construction project and not have to pay any taxes, and then not have to hire any local workers. So they could literally get this 10, 20, $30 million contract, bring in a bunch of guys from the mainland and have them come work on the federal military base. And so, hopefully when you're elected to Congress and you're able to bring home the bacon, which is what we really need, we need a bunch of federal dollars to help stimulate our economy. That could literally go to workers that aren't from Hawaii and never intend to stay in Hawaii and then leave after they're done. And so the importance of a project labor agreement or community workforce agreement on federal and military projects is overwhelming. There is no argument for why there shouldn't be. And we're hoping that when we elect guys like you to the Congress, that you can go up there and pass laws to make sure that these community workforce agreements and project labor agreements are used on federal projects like they were used on the or on the federal building during the 2009 recession. So that's basically what a project labor agreement or community workforce agreement does. Now, some of the myths that have been promulgated by people like the Heritage Foundation, the Cato Institute, basically all the people that the Koch brothers underwrite, they have all these white papers that come out and say, well, oh my gosh, project labor agreements, community workforce agreements, what these things do is they raise the price of construction, they are union-only agreements, and they take away the individual worker's right to bargain. And that is probably nothing further from the truth. These are the same institutes, by the way, that came up with Janus, that come up with these anti-union ideas, basically being cooked up by a bunch of billionaires and funded by a bunch of billionaires. So project labor agreements do not increase costs, because all federal projects and even state projects are done according to what they call Davis-Bacon or mini Davis-Bacon. And what that does is it sets a prevailing wage for the state. Hawaii's prevailing wage is relatively high because we have high union density. But if you go to like a non-union state or a right to work state like Arizona or Florida, you'd see that the prevailing wage rate is actually really quite low. And that's because there's no union. So you see wages and benefit packages are low in areas without unions, and wages and benefits are high in areas that do have unions. And that has a direct correlation to how many members of the middle class do you really have in your state. And so again, the myth is, oh, these, they're only union agreements. And the reality is, on the rail project right now that is covered by a project labor agreement, you have a non-union, non-signatory contractor, STG, Shimmick Taylor Granite, who's come into Hawaii to get the largest public works project going on right now in the entire state. And because there's a project labor agreement in place, what that means is they have to hire local people. And especially for these jobs that they say like, oh, well, these are highly specialized crane jobs. We can't have a Hawaii guy on that because they don't have the training. Well, because of the project labor agreement, they can bring in people that are specialized, and then they can hire guys from the bench and teach them. The most important piece of unions, and especially construction unions in Hawaii and across the nation, is our apprenticeship and training programs. What happens is we take a guy or girl off the street and turn them into a skilled craftsman that now has a career. One of the things that is so important to tell, we usually get them at the union hall. They did like a couple of, maybe a year in college, and then somebody got pregnant. So now they got to go get a job and they need health benefits. And so they get walked down to the construction, they get walked down to the carpenter's hall, the laborer's hall, like, hey, we heard you guys got good benefits. Can we sign up? And so what we say is, okay, let's see what you got. We put them through a couple of tests. We say, all right, you're fit and ready to go. And then we send them out there. And then while they're out there in the field, they get trained. Then on weekends or sometimes weeknights, they'll come back to the apprenticeship programs, they'll get trained. And so what you have is, you don't just have a job, you have a career. And that's what we need more of. We need more careers for local people so that they can afford to pay the $800,000 that it takes to buy a house, and afford to pay for a car, and have health benefits that don't just cover them, but cover them and their family, and make sure that they're not coming out of pocket for small things like, you know, medicine for your kids. I mean, I know you got small kids. I've got small kids. I mean, I feel like we're at the doctor's every single week for something or another, and that's what unions provide, is good healthcare and good wages, and that's what the construction unions want to provide. And we're just really excited that we have somebody young and somebody energetic like yourself who can move up to the mainland and start building up seniority and start bringing in more dollars, because right now we need every single dollar that is made in Hawaii to stay in Hawaii and go to these local families that are severely hurting right now. We're really hurting. And so we're hoping to kind of build our way into this recovery. And we think that you're going to play a big piece in it. And we really appreciate the time to come in and talk story with you.
No, thank you so much, Nathaniel. You know, you summarized it excellent, and I couldn't agree with you more. And if I get a chance to serve and represent Hawaiian Congress, if we're looking at, and what I hope is a new administration in the White House and a United States Senate that could potentially have Senator Schatz leading the MilCon committee, we're going to bring home the bacon for Hawaii. I hope we have a robust infrastructure, New Deal type of investment in our country to get our country going again. And a lot of that will be, let's rebuild our roads, our bridges, our highways. Let's build 21st century schools. Let's invest in hospitals, new technologies, green technologies. And so I'm really, really excited about that. And at the end of the day, you're absolutely right. You know, I want to make sure local contractors have a fair chance to compete for government projects and protect them from, companies that in other states do not pay prevailing wages. So I think it's a critical piece requiring prevailing wages on federal construction projects. So thank you for that. Right on. Okay, I'm going to jump over. We got about 25 minutes, less than 25 minutes. I want to jump over to Jason Bradshaw over at the ILWU. And so Jason, give us a few minutes on the ILWU here in Hawaii, who the ILWU represents, and some of the challenges of the ILWU today.
Yeah, so thank you, Senator, for having me on today. For those that don't know, the ILWU Local 142 is roughly an 18,000 member union today that represents the hotel industry, mostly on the neighbor islands. And we represent most of the hotel workers on Maui, Big Island, and Kauai. On Oahu, we have a few hotels, but mostly the hotels on Oahu are with Local 5. We also represent workers in Foodland. And we also represent workers at Surfco, the auto mechanics, the macadamia nuts. We still have workers in pineapple on Maui. We have coffee on Kauai. So we're a very diverse union representing a number of different workers throughout the spectrum in Hawaii. But ILW used to look a little different in the past, right? And this was back when initially the Big Five, and if people recall who the Big Five were in Hawaii, Castle and Cook, Alexander and Baldwin, C. Brewer, American Factors, Theo Day, controlled and operated most of Hawaii at that time. And it was back then that all of it was basically related to sugar. But and seek better working conditions and better benefits. At the time, the ILW was 4 different locals, but they'd realized that they had to come together in solidarity, essentially creating the motto, an injury to one is an injury to all. And by working together, they would be able to have greater political strength and get more accomplished. In 1946, the Great Sugar Strike occurred. And this is when everyone came together, realizing that if they work together, they stronger and better, which is ultimately what happened with the Great Sugar Strike. And then the ILW Local 142 formed in 1952 with the help of Jack Hall, who some people may know. And we are who we are today, obviously, though, with a lot less sugar. Well, there's no more sugar and a lot less pineapple. One of the reasons for this is because of free trade agreements that have passed over time by Congress that have allowed a lot of businesses to be able to go overseas and seek cheaper labor and export those goods or services to the United States at a very low cost. And so unfortunately, Hawaii lost a lot of its sugar workers to places in South America where they're able to utilize cheaper labor. So you're asking, like, what are some of the challenges we face today, Senator? And I would say, if we're going to look at this at the federal level, because you're going to be there in Congress, I say that clearly right to work is still an issue, though not in Hawaii. It's an issue in many states. And as Nathaniel brought up, very similarly with project labor agreements, there are 27 states across the country that are right to work. We like to call it right to work. States that are right to work, clearly the workers in those states earn less wages, have fewer benefits, and worse working conditions. And there's a lot of data on there to prove that. And one of the areas that we think could be helpful would be if it would be possible to introduce a bill Taft-Hartley that was passed in 1947 that allowed states to enact right to work across the country, which states have done, and other states continue to seek to do throughout their course of sessions. So that is somewhere that we feel is a challenge and could be helpful if Congress were to ever repeal Taft-Hartley. The minimum wage at the federal level. Now, Hawaii is fortunate that we still have a $10.10 an hour minimum wage, but in the federal, it's still $7.25. And the last time it increased was in 2009. And so it's been 11 years increase at the federal level for the minimum wage. And I think most would agree that $7.25 an hour is simply too low for most workers to be able to survive, afford rent, pay their bills, regardless of where they live. So an increase to the minimum wage, ideally to a living wage, would be helpful. What many don't realize too, at the national level, the tip credit is $5.12 an hour. So in some states, workers will earn as low as $2.13 an hour. In a lot of areas in restaurants, particularly if they work in a tip credit industry, and this means if they work in the restaurant industry, they will earn as low as $2.13 an hour. And this still happens today. That's clearly poverty wages. And so repealing the tip credit, making it parity with the minimum wage, whatever that may be, would be helpful. And I think what we've come to learn, and it happened because of the current crisis that we're in. And unfortunately, sometimes this has to happen for us to realize that maybe the current system 19, we saw a huge number of workers lose their jobs, unfortunately. And still to this day, a lot of them have lost their jobs and they don't know when they're going to return back to work. Many of those workers, their health insurance is tied to employment. And when they lose their job, they don't have health insurance. But people get sick regardless of whether, right, they have medical bills, and some significantly high, resulting in many working families that will end up going bankrupt because they can't afford prescription drugs or medical procedure. And unfortunately, during this pandemic, that we come to learn is workers have lost their health insurance. So on the national level, and I know this turns into a large debate on what is the best solution, but there should probably be some sort of plan out there that allows the government to be able to provide health insurance to workers that need it, and to ensure that everyone can have medical coverage. And I think that is something that needs to be discussed and looked at the federal level, would be some sort of, whatever you want to call it, Medicare for all, a public option, but some sort of way to make sure workers have that ability to be insured when they are unemployed, don't have a job, or maybe that job doesn't provide them health insurance. We're fortunate in Hawaii that we have the Prepaid Health Act, but you still got to work 20 or more hours a week to be able to get prepaid. Any working families face. And we talk about free trade agreements, and this has become a very, very heated debate, particularly in states where they've seen a significant direct impact by free trade agreements. Now in Hawaii, we saw it happen to us when we lost our sugar workers and our pineapple workers, but people are sometimes a little bit forgetting about that now. economy, from a agriculture economy into a tourism economy, which we are today. But places like Michigan, Indiana, Ohio, Pennsylvania, they've lost tens of thousands of jobs because of free trade agreements. And I think these are areas where in Congress at changing to ensure that we can keep good paying jobs in the United States and keeping workers employed here instead of exporting it out to countries, and then workers having to work in the service sector economy, which is what the United States is becoming, a service sector economy. And unfortunately, a lot of those jobs are low paying jobs and don't pay well. And so that's why it's so important we go back to what we initially talked about, raising the minimum wage to a living wage, making sure that there's medical insurance for everyone. Those are certainly things that I think we need to look at. And then lastly, the ability to move forward with what we call the Employee Free Choice Act, or card check. And what is this? This is simply majority sign up. And this allows workers to be able to organize by majority sign up. Under right now, the current law is that you get the majority of workers to sign a card, and then they got to petition the NLRB with an election. But unfortunately, what happens in many situations is the company will hire these attorneys that will spend millions of dollars basically running anti-union drives and delaying the results and delaying the election and delaying whatever it is, captive audience meetings, which are allowed to do, by the way, with the Taft-Hartley Act, which we should repeal. But they do all of this and ultimately make it very, very difficult to be able to run successful organizing drives for unions. And so by allowing the card check process, a majority sign-up process to occur, we actually can get sign up cards, submit them to the NLRB, and then be recognized as the union, go through this whole lengthy election process that goes through many delays, often years, and by initially terminated. So those are areas I think is at the federal level, and certainly things that I think we can try to correct at the federal level.
Great. Hey, thanks so much, Jason, for that great educational piece on a lot of different things. I totally agree that we should repeal the Taft-Hartley Act. That was a law enacted and amended the National Labor Relations Act, and I would vote to support the repeal of that. I'd also like to support some type of federal law that would prohibit right to work laws in these states that are implementing them. Minimum wage, absolutely. There's no doubt that the minimum wage started stagnating and flattening out in the late 1970s and has never gone up. It has never kept up with inflation. And it just, $7.25, come on, that's not a living wage. That's a poverty wage. I support a $15 minimum wage at the minimum. And, it's something. I really believe if you pay people a living wage, they reinvest those dollars into the economy. You increase productivity. You invest in your employee, and that will flow more money into the economy. It will demand more goods and services, and businesses will thrive if they do that. And so I can't agree with you more on that. So thank you so much. And with that, I'm going to jump over to Mitzie Higa with the Hawaii State Teachers Association to touch on why unions are important, the power of unions in organizing, and how unions help the worker and their families, especially through COVID-19. Thank you, Mitzie.
Thank you. I think what I've learned the most is that as unions, I can remember back, I'm aging myself, but back in 1979 when Norma Rae came out, a movie for those who don't know, about unionism and how the worker, when you try to stand up for yourself, and we see this often still today, that it doesn't work. Like the employer goes against the one employee. Well, what unions do is it's a collective organizing so that you can stand up together. And when you stand up together, that is where the action happens. And you've seen our red shirts with HSTA. You've seen us out there when we need to get the public's attention to get behind us and other unions. And it's that collective action of not just HSTA, but other unions that we work together. When we could find a commonality to help all of our workers, all of our labor, that's what helps us move forward. And that's why we so strongly feel that without unions, I mean, I've seen it. Before I was a teacher, I worked in the private sector. I worked in a non-union shop. I know what it's like. I saw people fired for even mentioning the word union. I was called by lawyers to stand up for that person because I refused to lie that that hadn't happened. And so I did depositions. I'm surprised I wasn't fired for that, but I stood up for those workers because I had trained them and I knew they were good. And it was only because they started talking union that they were fired. And I'm against that. So as I finished college, became a teacher, joined HSTA, I realized how much more of a benefit, not just from things like Norma Ray, where she stood up for textile workers, but it's definitely what happens is that collectively you can stand together, because oftentimes if you stand up yourself, you get shot down. But if you stand up together, they have to listen. And yeah, we don't get everything we want right away, but if we keep pushing the issue, get more and more people to stand up, more and more unions to join together, to stand up together, action does happen and things do get better. As unionism has decreased over the years, it has posed a problem. But I see more people, I mean, our union in Hawaii for HSTA is stronger than ever. When Janus happened and there was right to work states and they're not allowed to collectively bargain, we pushed harder for people to join unions. We talked about other unions. We joined with other unions to try and think of how we can work together to help everybody realize that it's not just our own workers we're talking about their families, we're talking about the economy. And for teachers, I always say teachers are the foundation of a society. If you can educate your populace, have an educated citizenry, it benefits everyone, it benefits the economy. And then you get them into those jobs that they want, whatever labor it is, whatever occupation they want to have, whether they're artists, whether they're construction workers, whether they're working at the docks. Everybody needs to have someone behind them, someone to be the middleman to step in and say, no, that's not right. And that's what a union is. That's when you stand in there and say, no, this is the rule. You're interpreting it wrong. That's not the intention, and you prove it. And if something is wrong, you stand up together and you make it right. And that's all about unionism. It's what we teach our students. We teach them to stand up for themselves. We teach them if there's a problem. We teach them about democracy. Well, that's what it's all about. And unionism, I think, is an equivalent to democracy. It's standing up together to make sure everything is working well for the common man, for everyone, not just the wealthy, not just the 1%, everybody. And that's basically what
Thank you, Mitzie.
all I have to say.
No, that was great. And there's no reason why in America, you shouldn't be able to have one job. You shouldn't be able to be paid a living wage, that you can save for retirement, that if your kids are sick, you can take them to the doctor and it's not going to bankrupt you. That if you show up to work for some reason and your boss doesn't like you that day, that he can't fire you. And that's why, unions are so important, because they stand for so many of those things. Finally, I've saved the HGA for last. And so I want to jump over to Stacy Moniz and have him talk about Janus and that Supreme Court decision, and just talk about unions and COVID and the HGA, maybe his thoughts on what the HGA is doing right now in discussing with the Higa administration on potential government furloughs right before Christmas. So thank you, Stacy, for being very patient.
Thank you. Mahalo for having me. One thing that I forgot to mention in the introductions is that, my role here at HGA is the advocacy chief. So I handle arbitrations and Hawaii Labor Relations Board matters. And so I had to pay specific or close attention to what happened with Janus. And, in a short period of time, it's difficult to explain all the ramifications of it. But what's important to understand is that the conservative majority that's there now at the Supreme Court, in the Janus case, overturned approximately 40 years of precedent regarding union membership. And it was definitely a step taken to reinforce the right to work people and the other organizations that everybody else has mentioned. And while at first glance, people took it as a very negative thing towards HGA and other unions, public sector unions, we took it as a motivating factor. We've turned around and used the Janus decision, which we completely disagree with, and is based on flawed reasoning. And we've used it to motivate us to recruit and advocate even stronger for our members. And if I can mention why it's flawed reasoning, the decision is based on a freedom of speech aspect or component, that Mr. Janus disagreed with the political activities of his union in Illinois. My own opinion is Mr. Janus was simply a pawn because after the decision, he pretty much immediately resigned from his position with the Illinois state government and moved on to other things. He was funded by all the right to work groups, the Koch brothers. As most of us know, a whole army of attorneys does not come cheap. Mr. Janus did not have the funds to pursue this case to the Supreme Court, and he was funded. The part of the flawed reasoning is that when you're working for a public sector union, like Mitzie's HSTA, UPW, HGA, to separate the political component from your employment is next to impossible. It is political. We're working for the political entity that runs the state and runs our counties. It's a political job. You're working for the government. To then say that the union that's representing you cannot take a position regarding a certain candidate or cannot take a position regarding a certain issue, that therefore that somehow violates someone's rights, is very flawed, because the very nature of your job is political. So there's no way around it. And it was definitely a concerted effort to try and strike a blow against unions across the country. But we've used it to thrive. We represent 9 different bargaining units that range from blue-collar supervisors to educational assistants, clerical workers, principals, vice principals, athletic directors, workers at the University of Hawaii, nurses, professional employees in the state and counties, sheriffs, lifeguards. We represent such a diverse community, which I think is reflective of our community at large. Our membership represents the community of Hawaii. Very diverse, all ethnic backgrounds, socioeconomic backgrounds. And so when we're carrying out our job, we're trying to do what's the collective good for a wide variety of people. And with that, you have the pandemic. And everyone knows all the issues that have arisen from this, but specifically to HGA, I'm not a tech guy. I had a person here helping me do this. And so at the same time, we now have to organize and communicate with all our members through platforms like Zoom, Facebook, Life Size, and it's made those tasks for us that much more challenging. It's a whole lot different to sit across from somebody at a table and explain what we're doing, get their feedback, which I prefer, but because of what we're facing, we've had to have these new challenges. And part of those challenges for us is making sure that our members get PPEs, that their workplaces are safe, sanitized, that they're in an as healthy an environment as possible. And if that's not accomplished, that's pretty much when I get involved and our group gets involved. We try to work with the state government and all the county governments, but they all have their own specific issues. And one of the overriding issues is the need for federal aid to the state and to the county governments, the state and local governments. It's very much needed. And we're fortunate to have a strong delegation to Congress. I believe for you, Kai, that when you get elected, you'll be another strong voice for Hawaii as part of our congressional delegation. But that federal aid is desperately needed. And speaking from HGA's perspective, if that aid does not come, and say the ideas being tossed around of furloughs and cuts and layoffs, obviously from HGA's perspective, we believe that all those matters are negotiable. We believe that those issues can be avoided because the detriment and the harm that it's going to cause is going to be tremendous, because it's not just going to be the government employees. It's going to permeate down through our whole community.
Right.
Because I know of examples when they were having cuts and people not being able to work. So you would have young people looking for a job, and let's say, for example, they needed a CDL license, to go drive a truck. But then there's no CDL examiners because of cuts, because of various things. So now you've got one person who's not working their government job, but now you got 2, 3, 4, 5 other people who can't get a job because they can't complete the test that only the government can administer to get their employment. So that's why that aid is so critical for us. And it ranges from the federal level, from veterans benefits. They already have to wait a long time. If federal money is not going to come, or there's going to be cuts, they're going to wait even longer. And same at the state and local level. So all of our workers, not only HGEA, but all the public sector workers, are vital to our community, vital to the economy. They go out, they shop, they go to the restaurants when they're open, they go to stores when they're open, and they contribute to the economy. And so to neglect that, and it's not to elevate them up above any private sector workers, and that's not what I'm saying. But the government functions are critical. Teachers are critical. As the teachers are teaching in their classroom, they need the educational assistants to assist them. They need the principals to administer the schools. It all interlocks together. And if we're not going to address, the issues regarding COVID, about providing the safe places to work and providing the PPEs, that highlights the importance of the union, because it's the union that's going to be fighting for those things, for them to maintain their wages, maintain their benefits, and maintain safe and healthy work environments as best as possible. And that's what we try to do at HGEA. And we're confident in you, Kai, when you get elected, that you're going to do everything that you can for labor and for our state. So we appreciate that.
Thank you so much, Stacy. And, at the same time, if working together with Senators Schatz and Hirono and Congressman Case, we can get a big, robust package for Hawaii. And I really believe we are going to need the federal government to help our local municipalities, our counties, and our state get through this. Then our state government needs to be ready to spend that money and administer that money and get that money out. I'm frustrated, as many are right now, that we got almost $1 billion in federal CARES Act funds, and we need to get that out and not lose a single penny of it at the end of this year. If you look at the massive inequality of wealth throughout our country today, it is things started really dropping off in the late 1970s, especially in the 1980s under President Reagan, who fired thousands of air traffic controllers. When we started through trade agreements like Jason talked about, where manufacturing jobs by the thousands started leaving our country. Jobs that were never going to come back. When we started losing jobs to automation, jobs were being outsourced to cheaper labor countries, or going to countries without any work rules. That is what has contributed to the massive inequality we see today in America. And then you compound that with this low wage, anti-union effort, like right to work laws, like Supreme Court decisions, like the Janus, and you know, that is really why we're in this situation that we're in today. And so, you know, I want people to know that our unions are absolutely critically important. Right now, I'm thinking about the 101 pilots that I fly with at Hawaiian Airlines that are going to be involuntarily furloughed in 6 days. And I think about their families and their health care. And I think about the flight attendants that are going to be furloughed. The many friends of my wife, who's been a flight attendant at Hawaiian for 20 years, and the ticket agents and the machinists and the mechanics and the cleaners and all those employees just at Hawaiian Airlines that are on the verge of being involuntarily furloughed on October 1st because the payment protection plan hasn't been continued. And that is the same situation at every single airline across our country, not to mention our local families and federal and state employees, government workers that, you know, potentially could be furloughed in December. And I just want people to know that Hawaii's labor and our unions have really contributed a lot to this state. Things like what Jason talked about, Prepaid Healthcare Act, temporary disability, TDI, a 5-day, 40-hour work week, the right to collectively bargain, FMLA, paid leave if you're sick. You know, if all those things have been fought for by labor unions, and those things have allowed Hawaii's middle-class families to grow and to purchase homes and to raise their families and send their children to college. So that's why unions are so vitally important to this state and to our country. I know we went a little bit over the time here. I'm going to give 30 seconds to each person just for a closing thought, because I want to do that rather than just end on this note. So, Randy, 30 seconds, summarize. You're on.
Yeah. Thank you again, Senator, for having this town hall. And I'm available on Facebook. If anybody has any questions, I will entertain answering them. And it was just a pleasure to be here. This is a great idea. Thank you.
Good. You know, there are a lot of questions and misconceptions about the Jones Act, and I encourage everyone to do your homework. There are different studies out there by different groups. Do your homework and educate yourself, and you know, come to a really good, solid, educated decision on the Jones Act and how it affects Hawaii. Jason? All right, Nathaniel. Jason's frozen.
Jason is frozen. All
Am I
right.
here?
Well, again, yeah. We just want to thank you, Senator, for the opportunity. And on the note that you ended on, it's if you like the weekend, if you like getting paid overtime after 40 hours, thank a union. It's okay to be anti-union. I know some people disagree with unions, but it's another thing. Right now, we don't have anti-union. We have anti-worker. We have anti-99%. That's what's going on out there. And that's got to stop. It's going to stop one way or another. I hope it does so peacefully and with the transition of power when we dump Trump and get a real man in there. So just fight the good fight and get up there and go bring home some bacon.
You got it. Thank you, Nathaniel. Mitzie. Okay, Jason, go for it.
Yes, sorry for the really bad internet connection. Not sure what's happening, but my apologies. I want to remind everyone to be sure they vote the general election. In Hawaii, you have until October 5th to register to vote if you want to get a ballot in the mail. And you can simply do that online. It's really easy. Just takes 1 minute and you'll be registered to vote. And of course, be sure our wonderful senator here, Kai Kelly for Congress. And thanks for having us on today.
Thank you, Jason. And also do your census. Make sure you do your census as well. Okay, Mitzie.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, I'm not sure if my internet's cutting out too, or if it's just
No.
Jason.
I got you.
Just simply, stronger together. We have to support all workers all the time, support our unions, get out and vote, take the census. It counts. Money comes to Hawaii because of the census. If we aren't counted, we don't get the federal dollars that we need. It supports our schools too. So thank you. Thank you for the invite.
Thank you. And finally, Stacy.
I want to say mahalo, Kai, and mahalo to everybody else that's been on this. Really appreciate it to get the message out about the importance of unions and how we need to stand together to vote, to take the census, and really stand unified, especially during this difficult time for everyone. So Kai, we look forward to you being in Congress. Thank you again.
Mahalo. Unions make Hawaii strong. Unions make America strong. And so in solidarity, aloha to all of you. Thank you so much. And take care. Have a great weekend. Enjoy that weekend, Nathaniel. I will. I'm going fishing. Aloha.
Aloha.